Okay, so subclasses. We're going to talk about subclass today now. One thing that I think is super cool about subclasses that needs to happen more, doesn't happen enough, is this really simple concept where I really think one of the, let's call it a missed opportunity for a subclass, because it doesn't have to apply to every subclass by any means, but it is something that I think is probably the greatest potential of a subclass in the way that sort of system is structured, where you have a class and you pick a subclass at first or second or third level or whatever. I think there's a lot of potential there in terms of making things sort of unfold in a particular way that the game kind of isn't making full use of. So mainly what I mean by that is the idea that the subclass can take the core decisions of the main class and sort of do something interesting with them. Now, a great example of sort of not doing that is probably the champion subclass for fighter. Now, I'm not trying to knock the subclass, and I'm not trying to, not trying to offer any criticism for anyone who particularly enjoys the subclass. But I think there's a reason that it's considered sort of a less desirable class. It gives you the extra crit range at third level, of course, and that's sort of its signature ability. So what is wrong with that design in the context of wanting subclasses to do more in terms of creating core tensions that work well with the primary class? Well, and perhaps this will illustrate what I mean by that a little bit more clearly, but the main issue there is that, well, it's not really an issue necessarily, but here's a statement that we can then apply a judgment to if we'd like. The champion subclass doesn't do very much on its own to really solidify or create core tensions for the fighter class, because this is oversimplifying a little bit, but broadly speaking, the fighter is all about hitting stuff, right? You get the ability to hit things a lot, and you want to hit things a lot, and then the decisions that you make in combat all revolve around hitting things a lot. Whether there's a matter of like, how do you survive while you hit things a lot? Where do you position? There's all these little decisions that you make that basically everyone is making, because it's sort of a tactical map-based combat, typically speaking. But with a fighter, it's really all about hitting things all the time, right? Everything you get is all about hitting stuff. That's sort of the whole point of the class. So it makes sense then to say something like, the champion subclass is good because it helps you hit things better, and that's what fighter wants. That makes sense, right? But the problem is that it doesn't create any new tensions, because here's the issue. Fighter already wants to hit stuff, and then champion offers an incentive for hitting stuff. So, and nothing else, because you don't make any new decisions. You just roll the d20. You still are rolling a d20. You just hope for a different result. Or rather, when it lands on a 19, you now get a crit, when before you didn't. But you're not doing anything to make it more likely to land on a 19, right? So there's not really much in the way of potential in terms of taking the system and kind of tweaking it and work with it to make it so that the champion subclass actually does something really cool. So this is not supposed to be a rant about the champion subclass. I'm just trying to illustrate why a particular subclass might not create any new particular core tensions for the classes, what the class already does. That isn't necessarily a criticism, actually, by the way. It's just a sort of statement. Well, it doesn't really create any new things. There's a couple new things that it kind of creates. Like, for example, you might think about like, hey, this is we can. You might want to hit things more often than you normally would. So instead of like a couple big hits, maybe you want a lot of little hits. You might want to try dual wielding, stuff like that. But the problem is now your crits do less, because if you have a D6 weapon and not a 2D6 weapon, just as an example, obviously the crit is less impactful. You could start saying things like, well, yes, but you can do things with the crit, right? Like, what if you multi-class Paladin and have some smites, whatever. There's other options than Paladin, obviously, but doing things with the crit so that you get more value out of the crit. Yeah, totally. But now you're multi-classing, right? And now the subclass isn't really about solidifying the core tensions of fighter and modifying them so that they're slightly unique but still very recognizable as that fighter core tension. Now it's just one element in a much larger set of a build. And I have no problem with that. Again, just to clarify, I don't hate multi-classing. I actually really like doing builds that multi-class. I enjoy the process of like putting those together, and I think it's really cool. But I think the potential for something like a subclass should always have some element. There should always be some element in any given subclass that is potential for that subclass to be used in isolation. And if you just use that class and that subclass, then it meaningfully modifies the sort of core tensions of the class. So a good example of something that does do this well is probably one of the monk subclasses, Way of Mercy. The Way of Mercy subclass is nice because it gives you the healing versus attacking thing, and it creates a very... Now, I will say it's a little bit clumsy the way it's implemented because it's very sort of on the nose, but they do create a pretty strong tension between healing or attacking. Which one do you do? The reason I say it's clumsy is because a lot of it is still based around flurry of blows, and it's like you attack it and then you heal somebody, or you attack it and then you attack it, and you're just sort of replacing an attack with a heal, and it's trying to make it into sort of more of a hybrid. But the idea that you are choosing between attacking and healing can be meaningful. There's another issue in that D&D healing is, typically speaking, again, these are broad statements, but typically speaking, healing in D&D is not that efficient, so it's not usually like you have a main healer and you're healing everybody every round, typically. But and that does create a couple of additional issues, because now it's like, well, healing is just not that efficient, so there's probably better ways to do it. Killing things is usually better than healing. Again, broadly speaking, just in terms of efficiency, resource efficiency, and as monk, you have very few resources because of key. But the design of the subclass is interesting in that it's very clearly trying to go, okay, normally monks have these tools. They can attack, they have a lot of, mobility and things like that, but they don't have a lot in the way of support in terms of healing. They do have support in the way of stunning strike, but now you're also making decisions because it costs key. There's tension between like stunning strike and the healing stuff and attacking more but doing the extra damage that Way of Mercy can potentially offer. And there's some interesting sort of decisions that unfold in terms of, well, when are you attacking and when are you not attacking? And while I think it's a little bit surface level in that it really kind of is just like that, and then a couple things that branch from it, and it's not this really sort of intricate sort of, if you've ever heard the term complexity, or low complexity but high depth, and how that's usually the thing. I feel like Way of Mercy is like fairly low complexity and fairly low depth, but there are a couple of interesting decisions in there still that make it work pretty decently, as opposed to the champion subclass, which is like there's just nothing. It's not actually nothing, but there's very little in the way of, well, I want to hit things as a fighter, and this makes me want to hit things more, which I'm already doing. So there's a sense of anticipation on the crits because you have the higher crit range, and there's the occasional point of feedback that you get from landing the 19, from attacking and then landing the 19. But the thing is, these don't reinforce interesting player behaviors or interesting player decisions, because it's just, I'm attacking. You want to attack it as much as possible, which a fighter already does. So this is all a really important preamble, because I want to talk about building your own subclasses and why you should not start with theme. You don't want to start with theme. You don't want to go in your subclass and go, well, the theme is that I'm a general in the military, and here's the abilities that a general in the military would get. That's not what you want to do. Just like with the class design, I mean, you can start with the theme in terms of like the basic idea, but this isn't the foundation of your design, and that's the important part. Please don't do that, because what you will find a lot of places that sort of, or a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of guides, a lot of resources out there that will sort of recommend that you start with a theme, and having a theme in mind as sort of your initial inspiration is perfectly fine, even preferable. But that's not really the foundation of your design. The foundation of your design, again, just like with the class, is what are the core player decisions. But the first thing you want to do is identify what the core player decisions of the class are, and then ask yourself, how could I modify those in an interesting way, right? Add a but to them. So the fighter wants to hit all the time, and you add something, and that little obstacle that you add in is borne out in the actual mechanics that you design for the subclass, so that the fighter is now making a slightly new decision in order to achieve some new aim, right? Just like a good example is, here's actually an interesting example, is the Paladin Smite ability, because it obviously is affected by crits. Paladins are often thinking about, well, how can I get advantage? How can I get more likely chance to hit to crit the thing? And that bears out in things like spell choice sometimes. People like Vengeance Paladin. A lot of the reason people like Vengeance Paladin is because they get a free advantage button and and hold person, which are both great options if you want to crit things. Hold person is obviously a good way to do that, right? So you can see how you go from the core ability of, oh, well, I want to crit things because Smite is really good on a crit, and then you start to create new player decisions that sort of flow from that. So if you're going to make a fighter subclass, you would want to start with the attacks and go, what can we do that's interesting with the attacks? So for example, the Battle Master subclass is a much better subclass because now you're thinking about, well, how do I want to attack and what effects do I want my attacks to have, which then leads you into, well, what sort of follow-up do I want to have to that, and can I take those attacks and then do something interesting with them that then creates a new scenario that I then deal with again in a new way. And you also have a lot of versatility, and you have to decide between, do you want to focus on versatility? Do you want to take things like precision attack? You have obviously limited maneuvers. So do you want to focus on consistency versus damage versus effects? Like you can, knock things prone. There are even some support abilities that rely on like other skills. Like Rally requires, I think, charisma, is it? That is the modifier for Rally, or parry that requires dexterity, whereas most maneuvers are based on strength or dex. You have things like Rally that require charisma. There's some cool stuff to be done with that, and I think there's an interesting, because it's an interesting way of like modifying the attack. It's a pretty solid system, whereas Champion doesn't modify your attack in a way that then results in more decision making. So this isn't really a super concrete breakdown of any particular concept or any particular design, but I did want to point out what differentiates a really well designed subclass versus something that doesn't feel as substantive. And the number one thing is really, does the subclass significantly alter the player decisions without changing what those decisions are foundationally? So just like with the fighter, you wouldn't want to make a subclass, for example, that is like, oh, you have disadvantage on every attack roll, but you have, I don't know, access to spells. Like, what? You just wouldn't don't play a fighter, right? Like, no one's gonna take this. If they've decided to play a fighter, they're not then going to decide to take that subclass. That makes no sense. You want something that fits with those sort of core decisions that the players are already making, and then modifying them in a way that creates interesting core tensions, so that those decisions lead to new decisions that are very much in line with the initial decisions that they were making with the fighter. Because whether people realize it or not, they have a sort of tacit expectation. No one picks a fighter because they want to be the party utility mage. And that's a ridiculous statement, because you go, well, yeah, duh. But yeah, duh is kind of my point, right? It's obviously true, because no one would ever do that, because it would be ridiculous. But the reason that it's ridiculous is that the fighter has particular expectations, and it does particular things, and the player is choosing the class in order to do those things, and it should meet those expectations. And the subclass needs to not meet expectations as much as enhance expectations. You need to take those expectations and just give enough of a twist on them that it still feels very much like the class, but actually creates some interesting new decisions. So nothing super concrete this week. I've been struggling to get videos out, and I would like to stop doing that. So I think hopefully you can expect these to be a little more regular from now on. And next week, we're either going to go into this topic a little bit more. If anybody's interested, by the way, you can leave a fucking comment. If you have any questions or anything, and if you'd like to see more subclass stuff coming next week or the week after, something like that, let me know, because I can do something maybe a little bit more concrete. We might even be able to build a subclass on video, like for you, and highlight the process. Or I have another idea that's all about sort of maximizing the value out of passive scores, and a system that I'm tooling with a little bit in my head, just to try to make use of those. Let me know in the comments if you are so inclined, which of those you like. Don't remember to like, comment, and subscribe, so that my channel fails and doesn't go anywhere. Thanks everybody for listening. I apologize for how late this video is. Hopefully you can expect more soon. Okay, bye.